How was your day? Maybe some of it was spent carrying something that wasn't yours to carry. An old loss, someone else's unfinished story. There was a falcon born without a father. His name was Horus, son of Osiris in Egyptian mythology. If today had a little of that, he knows where you've been. You don't have to figure anything out tonight. Just rest. And listen, this story starts in the middle, where a throne sits empty and two gods are already at war. The sky cracked open above the desert. Horus, his wings spanning the width of Egypt, dove through it like a thrown spear. Set was waiting. Red-furred, storm-crowned, enormous. He had held the throne for 80 years. He wasn't afraid. He should have been. The gods of Egypt watched from their thrones in heaven. The question wasn't who was stronger. The question, the one that had no clean answer, was who had the right. Horus was born for this, but Set had ruled it. Osiris had built it. And the gods had to choose. That is the thing about inheritance. It is never simple. Maybe you felt it, carrying someone's unfinished work. Stepping into a story that started before you. Horus carried all of Egypt, and still he kept going. This is what we do here. Every week, one story, one night. A myth that has endured for 4,000 years, and still has something to say. Get comfortable now, adjust your pillow, find your warmth. If you drift off before the end, Osiris won't mind. He's been watching over sleeping souls for a very long time. This is only the beginning of Horus's story. The part most people never reach, that's still ahead. But not tonight. Tonight, just this. If tonight felt like something, subscribe. We'll be here next week. Another story, another night like this. Now back to ours. To understand Horus, you have to understand what he lost before he was born. His father Osiris was the first king, the good one, the one they still talk about. Set was Osiris's brother. He watched his brother rule. He watched the people love him. And something inside Set, ancient and cold, decided it couldn't stand it. The murder of Osiris is one of the oldest stories on Earth. Set trapped his brother in a golden coffin and cast it into the Nile. Osiris drowned in what he had built. Isis found him. She always found him. That is the first thing to know about her. She did not stop. She crossed every border to bring him back. With the last of her magic, Isis brought Osiris back, long enough. Long enough that Horus could be conceived. Then Set found the body again. And this time, he scattered it across Egypt. Isis gathered every piece. All but one, lost to the Nile. She buried him, and she built from that grief something that would outlast Set. A son. Before Horus, there was Osiris. And before you can understand what Horus lost, you have to understand what Osiris was. Osiris taught the Egyptians to farm. He gave them music. He gave them law. He traveled the world sharing what he knew. Because he believed the world could be better. Set watched all of it. Set watched the gratitude, the devotion. And something in him decided, quietly, over a long time, that it should have been his. Set built a coffin, the most beautiful thing ever made, gold and jewels and cedar, perfectly fitted to Osiris's body. He knew the dimensions. He'd been measuring for years. At the feast, Set made a game of it. Whoever fit the coffin perfectly, it was theirs to keep. One by one the guests tried. None fit. Then Osiris stepped in. Of course he fit. It was made for him. The lid slammed shut before he could move. Set's followers sealed it with molten lead. They carried it to the Nile and cast it in. The coffin moved with the current, south toward the sea. Osiris, the good king, drowned in his own kingdom. Isis knew before anyone told her. That is the kind of knowing that lives in the body. Not a thought, a collapse. She ran. She searched the length of Egypt. When the coffin washed ashore in Byblos, far up the coast, in a foreign kingdom, she found it encased in a great tree. The king of Byblos had cut the tree for a pillar in his palace. He didn't know what was inside. Osiris had become a support beam in someone else's house. Isis revealed herself. The king gave her the pillar. She opened it herself alone in a field at the edge of the city. And she wept so hard the king's child died of fright. She brought the body back to Egypt. She hid it in the marshes. That was her first mistake, not bringing him back, but thinking Set had stopped watching. Set found the body while Isis was away. His rage, the rage of someone who thought it was finished, was absolute. He cut Osiris into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. Maybe you know that feeling. Something you thought was resolved, breaking open again. Worse than before. Because you'd already let yourself believe it was over. Isis searched again. She found 13 of the 14 pieces. The 14th, Osiris's phallus, had been swallowed by a Nile fish. It was gone. She made a replacement from gold. She performed the great ritual. She wrapped him. She spoke the words that only she knew. And for a time, long enough, Osiris breathed again. From that brief return, Horus was conceived. Osiris descended then to the Duat, the underworld, to rule the dead. His place in the living world was over. His son would carry it forward. Set took the throne. There was no one left to stop him, not yet. He ruled as pharaoh. The gods were uneasy, but they didn't intervene. Not immediately. Power tends to be its own justification. Isis fled. She had to. Set would have taken the child. She went deep into the papyrus marshes of the Nile Delta, into Chemis, where the reeds grew taller than a man. Horus was born in the marshes. No palace, no throne room, no ceremony, just Isis and the reeds and the sound of the Nile. He was small. He was hidden. And Set had spies everywhere. Scorpions, serpents, the creatures of chaos moving through every shadow. 7 scorpions guarded them, sent by Thoth, the god of wisdom, who had quietly taken Isis's side. Thoth doesn't appear much in this story, but he is always there at the right moment. Here's the part the myths never make obvious. Isis was not simply a grieving wife. She was the architect of everything that followed. Every move Horus made, she had prepared it. One day Isis left to find food. She came back to find Horus lying in the reeds, rigid eyes closed, stung by a scorpion. His lips were blue. He wasn't breathing. Isis cried out to the boat of Rai, the sun god's vessel crossing the sky above. Everything stopped. Even Ra stopped when Isis cried. Thoth gave her the words in the right order. Isis spoke them over Horus until the venom reversed, and he opened his eyes. She'd nearly lost him before he'd even begun. He recovered. He always recovered. That's the thing about Horus. He was wounded repeatedly, and each time, something in him adapted. The wounds became part of the armor. Years passed. Set ruled Egypt. The land was not destroyed under him. He was too smart for that. But it was diminished. The floods came less reliably. The people felt it. The gods were split. Some believed Set's rule was legitimate. Power, after all, is a form of proof. Others believed the son of Osiris had a prior claim. Horus grew, not just in body, in knowledge. Isis had taught him everything she knew, the spells, the names, the shape of the argument he would have to make. The day came when Isis told him it's time. He was ready, or as ready as anyone could be to walk into a court where the god who killed your father sat on your father's throne. The Hall of the Enid, the court of the 9 great gods, was exactly as vast and cold as Horus had imagined. Set was already there, seated near the center, comfortable. Horus made his claim. He laid it out carefully, the lineage, the law, the precedent. His voice did not shake. He had been preparing this his entire life. Set answered. He was eloquent. You don't hold power for 80 years without learning to talk about it. He spoke about strength, about what actually holds a kingdom together. Ra weighed in and surprised everyone. He sided with Set. The most powerful god in Egypt looked at the son of Osiris and said, "Not yet." That was the first of many setbacks. The tribunal did not resolve quickly. It went on for decades. A divine court case that no one could close, because no one could bear the consequences of being wrong. Horus kept coming back. That's the part that matters. Set tried to buy him off. The gods tried to offer compromise. Horus said no every time. You've been there. Not in a divine court, but in that room. The one where the decision is being delayed by the people with power to make it. Outside the tribunal, the battles continued. The wars between Horus and Set were not metaphor. They were real, violent, and extraordinary. Set gouged out Horus's left eye. Horus also tore off Set's testicles in that same battle. So it was not one-sided. But the eye was the wound that mattered to the world. It became a symbol before it even healed. Horus withdrew into the papyrus thickets to heal. Hathor, goddess of love and beauty, found him there. She poured gazelle milk into the empty socket. His sight returned. The Egyptians didn't make the eye of Horus to frighten people. They made it because Horus lost his eye and got it back. The eye that was wounded and restored meant protection. They put it on everything: amulets, coffins, doorways, the eyes of ships sailing the Nile, every surface that needed watching over. Horus's recovered eye became the most common protective symbol in Egyptian history. There is something in that idea, that the most powerful protective symbol was born from a wound. Not from invincibility, from surviving. This moment, Horus wounded and healed, is what the ancient Egyptians returned to over and over. It told them something real, that the eye of the gods was on them, even after damage, maybe because of it. Remember that, for later, the eye Horus lost and got back will come back to it. It matters more than it seems, even now. Back in the tribunal, Isis was not simply watching, she was working. She appeared before the judges in disguise, as a beautiful widow whose husband had been stolen by a stronger man. She asked the tribunal. A powerful man came to this widow's land. He seized her husband's cattle. He struck the husband. Should not the son reclaim what was taken? Set answered yes. He had forgotten who was asking. Set had ruled against himself. Isis had gotten him to say out loud, in front of every god in Egypt, that the son of a murdered man deserved what was taken. He said it about Horus, without knowing. Ra was furious, not at Set, at Isis. He felt manipulated. He declared the tribunal would move to an island. Isis was banned from crossing the water. But Isis crossed anyway. She bribed the ferryman with a golden signet ring. She disguised herself again, this time as a young woman, and continued her work. She didn't stop for Ra either. She seduced Set on the island, appearing to him as a beautiful stranger with a story about her dead husband's inheritance. Set, again, told her what should be done about it. This time even Ra laughed. Set looked at Ra. Ra shrugged. The joke was on Set, and even the sun god could see it. Something shifted in the room after that. Set proposed a contest. Hippo form. The gods would transform into hippos and fight beneath the Nile. The one who stayed submerged longest would win the throne. Isis could not help herself. She harpooned Set. She missed. She hit Horus instead. The hall went very quiet when Horus surfaced. Or if he was, he set it aside. "Mother," he said. Isis, horrified at herself, freed Set. Set escaped. And Horus went on. This is what the myths never make obvious. This story is about a family, not a war between strangers. A brother who killed a brother. A son who spent his life answering for it. Set challenged Horus to a boat race. Stone boats. Set built a mountain of stone. Horus plastered wood to look like stone and launched it. His stone boat floated. Set sank. Set laughed. He turned himself into a hippo and charged Horus's boat. Horus drew his spear. The battle resumed. It always resumed. The tribunal was deadlocked. For 80 years of divine time it had continued. The gods were exhausted with it. Everyone knew it had to end. No one wanted to be the one to decide. Then someone had the idea to write to Osiris. Osiris, in the dot, presiding over the dead, hadn't been consulted. Because no one wanted to speak to the dead king about his throne. Osiris wrote back. His reply was short. He asked one question: who feeds the gods? Who grows the grain? Who makes the Nile flood? The living do. And the living have a king. He also said, quietly at the end, that he had soldiers. The dead don't sleep. They could come up if the gods preferred to continue arguing. Ra read it a second time. Set looked at Ra. The room had changed. Everyone felt it. The question that had taken 80 years was finally becoming an answer. But before the verdict, one more trial. Set proposed something different this time. Not strength, not cleverness. He proposed something personal. Set tried to humiliate Horus, to break him before the gods in a way that would make the verdict impossible. He believed, if he could shame Horus publicly, the court would turn. Horus told Thoth. Thoth told the tribunal. Set's attempt at humiliation became, in the telling, its own verdict. The gods looked at Set with new eyes. Set had been powerful for so long he had forgotten power that requires humiliation to survive is already failing. The tribunal felt it, even those who had sided with Set. This moment is easy to miss. But it changes everything. Horus did not win by being stronger. He won by refusing to become Set, even when he could have. Ra called for a final deliberation. The tribunal gathered, all 9, and for the first time in 80 years, they moved toward the same direction. They called Horus forward. They called Set forward. Both stood before Ra's throne. The sun god looked at both of them for a long time before he spoke. Ra spoke Horus's name. Horus, son of Osiris, son of Isis, heir of Egypt, would be given his father's throne. The tribunal rose. Even those who had fought it. Set was not killed. The Egyptians were specific about this. Set was given the domain of the storms, the desert sky, the chaos of foreign lands. He was still a god, just not this one's god. In some tellings, Set becomes the guardian of Ra's bark, the one who fights the chaos serpent Apep each night, so the sun can rise. His destructive energy finally put to work. The Egyptians understood something. The world needs both Horus and Set. Order needs the energy of chaos to stay alive. The question was never good versus evil. It was about who holds the throne. Isis was at the edge of the hall when the verdict was read. She did not cry out. She had been working toward this moment since before Horus was born. She simply closed her eyes. Before the coronation, one thing remained. Horus needed to go down to the dot. He needed to see his father, to tell him. The threshold of the dot is not a door. It's a river. Dark water under a sky that has never seen the sun. Horus stood at its edge and stepped in. The dot is not what people imagine. Not a place of punishment. A place of continuation. Vast and dark and full. Souls moving through it like water through reeds. Osiris was at the center. On a throne of black stone, wrapped in the white linen of death, his green skin the only color in a room of shadow. He looked up when Horus arrived. Horus said, "It's done. The tribunal has ruled. Your throne is mine now. I wanted you to hear it from me." Osiris was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You look like her. The way you held your hands when you spoke, that's Isis." They did not have long. The living cannot stay in the dot. But Horus stayed as long as he could. Some things can only be said in that kind of dark. When Horus left, Osiris watched him go from the throne. He didn't call after him. That's not what you do when the person you're watching has somewhere to be. Horus returned to the living world. The tribunal was assembled. The gods were gathered. The coronation would take place at dawn. Isis dressed him. That detail appears in the oldest texts. After everything, after the marshes and the battles and the 80 years of courts, she dressed him. That's the part that stays with you. Thoth brought the crowns, the white crown of Upper Egypt, the red crown of Lower Egypt. Together, the double crown, the symbol of a unified kingdom. Ra descended from the solar bark to preside. Even Ra, who had been wrong, who had sided with Set, was here. He didn't say anything about that, he just came. The gods formed 2 lines from the temple entrance to the inner sanctum. Horus walked between them. Every god who had argued against him, every god who had supported him, both lines. Thoth placed the double crown on his head. One motion. One crown settling onto the falcon head of Osiris's son. 80 years of divine time concluded. The gods called his name. Horus, living Horus, Lord of the 2 lands, son of Osiris. The names rang through the hall and out across the Nile and into the sky. Isis heard it. Even at the edge of the hall, where she had always stood, at the threshold, never at the center. She heard every syllable of his name. And in the dot, Osiris felt it too. The texts say the dead know when the living carry their name forward. Osiris on his black throne, in the dark, felt the crowning of his son like a warmth through stone. That's the part that stays with you. Not the battles, not the tribunal. The moment the dead king felt his son crowned. Through everything. From the other side. But before the coronation was a ceremony. It was a negotiation. Because kingship in Egypt was not just a title. It was a covenant. Horus had to make promises. He promised to be Osiris's son in all his actions. To keep Ma'at, the principle of order, truth, and balance. To maintain the floods. To feed the people. He promised to honor the dead. To maintain the rights. To ensure every soul that passed into the dot was received properly. That meant keeping faith with Osiris's kingdom as well as his own. He promised to be both, the living Horus, son of Osiris, and Osiris himself upon his death. Every pharaoh after him would carry this dual identity. Alive, Horus. This is what the Egyptians believed about their kings. Every pharaoh who ever sat on Egypt's throne was Horus while alive. And Osiris when they died. The myth wasn't just a story, it was a job description. Horus took the throne. The kingdom was real under him now. The marshes where he was born were still there. He could still smell them. But Egypt was larger than he had imagined from inside the reeds. His first act was not a battle or a decree. He sent word to Osiris in the dot, a message. The texts don't record what it said. Some things aren't written down. The land responded to the new king. The Egyptians believed it literally, that when Horus ruled, the Nile rose correctly, that the crops grew, that the sky was at peace. But Set was not at peace. Set in the storm desert, given his new domain, did not adapt quietly. He raged against the borders. He sent chaos where he could reach. There were battles after the coronation. The myths contain many. The full war between Horus and Set is not one fight but dozens, spread across generations of divine time. In the great battles at Edfu, Horus fought in Falcon form. Enormous, his wingspan the width of the sky, diving on Set's armies like a dropped sun. The soldiers of Horus carried harpoons tipped in iron. The followers of Horus, they were called. They appear in the texts as a force of precision and purpose, not rage, precision. Set fought back with the desert itself. Sandstorms that buried armies. Lightning from clear sky. The ground cracking open along fault lines he knew by name. The battles went on for days. Neither god could end the other. They were too matched, the balance too precise. The world needed both of them to keep existing. That's the part that stays with you. The Egyptians didn't believe evil could be destroyed. Only contained, given a job. Pointed towards something useful. Horus learned this early. His battles with Set never ended in annihilation. They ended in new agreements. New lines on the map. New terms for coexistence. The great temples of Horus were built at Edfu, the battlefield. Not despite the fighting, but because of it. You honor the place where the hard thing happened. There is something in that. The Egyptians built their greatest monuments on top of their hardest moments. Not to celebrate the violence, to mark the survival. Horus ruled the sky. His right eye was the sun, crossing each day from east to west. His left eye was the moon, the eye that was wounded, the one that came back. That's why the Egyptians watched the moon. Every month it was wounded, waning, disappearing. Every month it came back. Horus's eye, cycling through loss and return. And his right eye, the sun, never set forever. Even when it crossed the underworld each night, it rose again. Because Ra and Horus were connected, the sky had two keepers. The Egyptians found this comforting. The idea that the sky was watched, that the wounds in it, the setting sun, the vanishing moon, were not endings, just parts of a longer cycle. Maybe you know that feeling. Looking at the sky at night and feeling less alone in it. The sense that something larger is keeping watch. Horus didn't rule alone. He had his court, the followers, the companion gods. But the one he returned to most was Thoth, the god of wisdom who had always been quietly present. Thoth had been there from the beginning, sending scorpions to protect the baby in the reeds, giving Isis the words to heal the stung child, writing the verdict at the tribunal, always present, never loud about it. There is always someone like Thoth, the one who is there at every critical moment, who never takes credit, who just keeps showing up and doing the necessary thing. Horus also relied on Hathor, the goddess who healed his eye. They are often paired in the temples. Horus the falcon, Hathor the cow goddess. Power and tenderness, neither complete without the other. Hathor had many roles, but in this story she appears at the exact moment Horus needs her most, after his worst wound, in his deepest withdrawal, and she brings him back. There is something in that too, the warrior who needs to be healed, the one who fights everything and still needs someone to come find them when it's too much. The battles at Edfu continued into Horus's rule. Set was relentless in his challenges, and each time, Horus answered. Not out of rage, out of responsibility. Set took many forms in those battles. A hippopotamus, a serpent, a red bull, each form a different face of chaos, and Horus learned to read them all. This moment is easy to miss, but it changes everything about how you read the rest of this story. Horus didn't win because he was stronger. He won because he paid attention. The word the Egyptians used was ma'at. It appears in every important text, every coronation, every verdict, every funeral rite. Ma'at, truth, justice, balance, cosmic order. Ma'at was not a law. It was a condition. The natural state of a world in right relationship. The floods at the right height, the stars in their places, the dead properly received. The opposite of Ma'at was Isfet. Disorder, injustice, falsehood. Set embodied Esfet when he murdered Osiris. Horus embodied Ma'at when he refused to stop fighting. Every pharaoh was expected to maintain Ma'at, not to achieve it once, to maintain it daily. The king's most important ritual was not military. It was offering the feather of Ma'at to the gods each morning. This is what the Horus myth gave Egypt. Not a warrior king who conquered. A king who maintained, who kept the balance, who paid the daily cost of order with daily attention. The battles at Edfu reached a turning point in the Third Great Campaign. Set had moved his forces across the border, deep into the Black Land, the Nile Valley, Egypt's heart. Horus called the followers, every one of them. He called on Thoth for strategy. He called on Hathor for the kind of resolve that comes after you've already been wounded and healed and wounded again. The march to Edfu took 3 days. They moved in silence. No battle cries, no drums. Horus had learned. The moment your enemy knows you're coming is the moment you've already made the first mistake. They arrived at the battlefield at dawn. Horus in falcon form on the ridge above, his wings spread, the rising sun behind him, the shadow of a falcon over Set's entire army. Set saw him. Across the valley, from the center of his forces, Set saw the falcon on the ridge. And for the first time, in all the long decades of their conflict, Set hesitated. Horus descended, not with rage, with precision. The followers moved with him, the formation tight, the harpoons ready. The army of chaos met the army of order on the plain at Edfu. The battle was enormous. The texts describe the sound of it reaching the stars. The Nile paused in its banks. Even Ra stopped his bark to watch. Set fought as a vast hippopotamus in the Nile itself, his body blocking the current, his roar shaking the riverbanks. Horus met him in the water. Horus drove his harpoon into Set's skull, not killing him. A god cannot be killed by another god, but binding him. The iron tip carried the same force as the tribunal's verdict. Set's armies broke. When their god was bound, they scattered into the desert. Back across the border, back into the Red Land where they came from. The battle of Edfu was over. Horus stood in the river, the harpoon still in his hand. Set bound in the water beside him, the Nile flowing normally again around them. He looked at Set. The chaos god was not pleading. He wasn't crying. He was looking back at Horus with the specific expression of someone who has been here before, and knows this isn't the end. Horus released him. That's what the texts say. He bound him, he won, and then he released him. Because the world needs what Set carries, just not on Egypt's throne. The followers carried their wounded back from the river. Horus walked among them. Not separate from them, among them. That was the difference between Osiris's son and Set. They returned to the temple at Edfu. The priests were waiting with oil and linen. The soldiers were healed, the rituals performed, the dead honored before the living celebrated. Then the celebration. The followers of Horus filled the temple courtyard. There was music, the kind that happens after danger, the kind that tastes different from ordinary music. Horus sat apart for a part of the evening. Not brooding, just quiet, watching his people celebrate, thinking of Osiris on the Duat throne, who never got to see this. Maybe you know that feeling. Being in the room, part of the thing, and also somewhere else. Carrying someone who isn't there, wishing they could see it. Hathor found him sitting there. She didn't say anything grand. She sat beside him and poured him wine. Sometimes that's what the goddess of love does. The victory at Edfu would be commemorated for 3,000 years. The temple built there, still standing, shows the battles in carved relief from floor to ceiling. The annual festival of victory was held at Edfu for 2,000 years. Priests acted out the battle. Horus in a boat, a hippo target representing Set, Harpoon's throne, the myth kept alive by repetition. 2,000 years of the same festival. That number stops you if you hold it. Horus's story told in the same place, in the same way, by people who had never known anything else. Here's the part the myths never make obvious. The reason the story survived wasn't because it was written down. It survived because people kept doing it, kept performing it, kept living inside it. Horus's rule extended the length of Egypt, north to south, from the delta where he was born to the first cataract in the south. Every part of it his. He maintained the rites of Maat, the daily offerings, the flood measurements, the accounting of grain. Not glamorous, but the kingdom required it. The gods were at peace mostly, Set in the desert, Osiris in the dot, Ra in his bark, Thoth recording Hathor present, the divine family in its new configuration. Mostly, because Set challenged again. He always challenged again. But the challenges changed, became smaller, more specific. Not the throne, the boundary, the specific location of a canal. This is the natural order of things. The great contest resolved, the conflict continued in smaller forms. That's not failure, that's governance. Years passed, Horus ruled. The floods came, the harvests grew, the people lived. That is the least dramatic sentence in the whole myth. And the most important one. Horus aged differently than mortals. Divine time moves strangely. But he felt the weight of the years, not as exhaustion, as depth. The way a river carries more at flood than at low water. He still thought of Osiris. That never stopped. Each morning, the ritual offering of Malat, and sometimes, just before the priest handed him the small figure, Horus would pause. The priests noticed. When the king paused, they paused. They didn't know what he was thinking, but they knew it was the same pause every morning, at the same moment. Then Set came back. Not with an army, with a claim. A new genealogical argument, carefully constructed. Set had been thinking for years. The chaos god, it turned out, could also be patient. Set argued that Horus was illegitimate. Not because of the lineage, but because Osiris had not been alive when Horus was conceived. That the ritual Isis performed was impossible. That the conception itself was a lie. Isis was called to testify. She stood before the tribunal, older now, the years of the kingdom's peace in her posture. And she told them exactly what she had done. She didn't ask them to believe the impossible. She told them, I am the goddess of magic. The impossible is my domain. And I did what I did because it was necessary. Because Egypt needed an heir. Ra stood. He had been quiet for the whole hearing. When he stood, the room went absolutely still. Ra said enough. The verdict stands. The tribunal ruled. I ruled. There is no new argument. There is only the continued life of a god who cannot accept that he lost. He didn't rage. He walked out. Quietly. And that quietness was more final than any battle had been. The god of chaos, accepting that this particular contest was over. The gods turned to Horus. He was still standing. He had been standing through the whole proceeding. Thoth, at the edge of the hall, wrote one line at the bottom of the record. That's all. Outside, the sky was clear. The Nile was at the right height. And somewhere in the desert, a red storm moved along the border. Set, returning to his domain, carrying his energy where it could be used. The first great reckoning was over. After Set left the tribunal, a strange stillness settled over Egypt. Not peace exactly, something more fragile. The absence of a contest that had defined everything. Horus didn't celebrate long. That was his nature. He went back to the work. The irrigation surveys, the temple accounts, the grain records that Thoth kept pressing him to review. Isis came to him 3 days after Set's departure. She found him in the garden of the palace, sitting alone, watching a falcon circle above the Nile. She sat beside him. They watched the falcon together for a while. Then she said, "You know this isn't finished." Horus said, "I know." She said, "Set will find another form. Not the tribunal, not the battlefield. Something we haven't seen yet. He's been quiet. That's when he's most dangerous." She was right. Set was quiet for 7 years after the tribunal. 7 years in his desert domain, storms, red sands, the far borders. And then a report came from the eastern edge. Set had made an alliance with the foreign powers beyond Egypt's borders, the peoples of the desert, the kingdoms of the eastern chaos lands. He was building something new. He wasn't claiming the throne of Egypt this time. He was threatening to make Egypt's borders irrelevant, to dissolve the boundaries between the ordered land and the surrounding chaos. This was new. Not a claim on the throne, a claim on the concept of Egypt itself. If Ma'at was the order that defined the kingdom, Set was now threatening the order, not the ruler. Here's the part that matters before the end. Set had learned something from 80 years of fighting Horus directly. He couldn't win that way, so he changed the game. Horus called the War Council. Not just the followers of Horus, the full divine assembly. Every god who held a domain that bordered chaos. This was everyone's problem now. Sobek spoke first. The crocodile god of the Nile. His domain was the water, and the water knew everything the land was doing. He said, "It's already inside the borders, not just at the edge." Neith, the oldest of the war goddesses, who had been present at the tribunal long ago, said Set is not wrong to adapt. We should expect nothing less. The question is whether we adapt faster. Horus was quiet through most of the council. He let the others speak. He listened the way Isis had taught him. Not for the argument, for what was underneath the argument. When he finally spoke, he said 3 things. Firstly, we don't fight at the border. That's where Set wants us. We fight in the interior, by strengthening what's already there. Second, we don't isolate Set. We don't push him out entirely. We give him something to guard. Something that matters to us both. Something Set's energy is actually suited to defend. Third, we tell the people. Not the divine version, the human version. We tell Egypt's people what their borders mean. Why the order is worth defending, not as subjects but as participants. Thoth wrote it all down. He always wrote it all down. Later, it would become part of the record. The king who explained things to his people, rather than simply commanding them. The council dispersed. Each god returned to their domain with their instructions. Set received his, through Thoth, formally, an offer of a specific role in Egypt's defense of the Eastern Passage. Set's response came back in 3 days. 1 word. Yes, Horus read it. Put it down. Looked out at the Nile for a long time. Then good. Isis, when she heard, said your father would have done it differently. Horus said, I know. She said it might work better this way. He said, I know that too. Set's eastern deployment changed things at the border. The foreign kingdoms pulled back when they saw who was now guarding the passage. Chaos, in a controlled direction is its own warning. But something else was happening. Further south, in the Nome of Hermopolis, Thoth's own city, a different kind of disorder was forming. Not armies, something older. There were priests in Hermopolis who had begun teaching something different. Not worship of Set. Subtler than that, a theology of chaos as the natural state, Ma'at as the aberration, order as the thing that needed justification. Horus heard about it from Thoth, who was furious in the specific way of a god, who has dedicated his existence to truth, and is watching someone use his city to spread the opposite. This was Set's real move, not armies at the border, not a legal claim to the throne, a philosophical attack, a slow rewriting of the story underneath the story. Set hadn't changed. He had evolved. After 80 years of failing to take the throne by force, after the tribunal, after the battles, he had learned to attack the idea of the throne instead. Horus called Thoth, not for records, for something Thoth had never been asked to do before, to write the counter-argument, to go into Hermopolis himself and speak. And Horus realized something. This new challenge required something the battles at Edfu never had. Not strength, not strategy, the ability to explain why any of it mattered. The story wasn't over. It had never been over. It had simply changed shape. And the hardest part, the part Horus had been preparing for without knowing it, was still ahead. Thoth went to Hermopolis alone. No army, no divine retinue. Just his palette, his reeds, and 30 years of accumulated records. He found the lead priest in the library, reading, ironically, from a text Thoth himself had written 400 years prior. Thoth sat down across from him and said, "You've misread that passage." The debate in Hermopolis lasted 11 days. It was not a battle. It was something harder. A conversation between two people who had read the same texts and reached different conclusions. On the third day, a priest who had been silent asked Thoth directly if Ma'at is the natural order. Why does it require so much effort to maintain? Thoth was quiet for a long time. Then because everything worth keeping does. That's the part that stays with you. Not the battles at Edfu, not the tribunal. This, a quiet room in Hermopolis. An ibis, headed god defending order with words instead of weapons. By the 11th day the lead priest conceded. Not everything but the central point. Chaos was not the natural state. It was a condition. One Egypt had spent 3,000 years learning to navigate. Thoth returned to Horus with the revised texts, both versions, the original and the new reading. He presented them without comment. Horus read both. Then he asked, "Which do you believe?" Thoth said, "I believe Ma'at is real. Not because it's comfortable or because it serves the throne. Because in 30 years of recording everything that happens, I've seen what the world looks like when it breaks down. And it looks like everything we've fought against." Horus put the scrolls down. He said, "Then we keep going." Thoth said yes. That was the entire conversation. Sometimes the most important decisions are the shortest ones. Set heard about Hermopolis, about Thoth's 11 days, about the lead priest's concession. And he made his next move. He stopped being subtle. He sent storms into the delta. Not the eastern border, the delta. The most fertile part of Egypt. The place where the Nile splits into fingers and feeds the most people. The harvest was damaged, not destroyed. Set was careful enough not to push past the point where Horus would have no choice, but to respond with full force. Just damage, just enough. Horus went to the delta himself. That mattered. Not sending officials, not sending priests. The king walking the flooded fields, speaking to the farmers, assessing the damage with his own eyes. He made a promise. Not a divine promise, a practical one. The granaries of the southern nomes would share with the delta through the winter. No one would go without. Set watched this too. The grain redistribution, the king walking the flooded fields. And something in Set's calculation shifted. Because this was not the response he had planned for. He had expected Horus to respond with force, to give him a battlefield. Instead, Horus gave his people grain. Set couldn't fight grain. He couldn't make a war against redistribution. So Set escalated. He moved his storms further south, toward the temples. Not the grain, the sacred sites, the places that held the story of Egypt in stone. This was the cruelest move. A flood can be recovered from. A storm-damaged harvest can be redistributed. But eroded reliefs, the stories they carried, those were irreplaceable. Horus felt it differently than the harvest. The grain was practical. The temples were where Egypt kept its understanding of itself. To lose them was to lose the argument Thoth had just won in Hermopolis. He went to Ra, not to the tribunal, to Ra directly. At dawn, on the solar bark, before the day had begun. Two gods in the early light above the Nile. Horus said he's attacking the temples. Ra said I know. Horus said I need to respond directly, not redistribution, not debate. Set has to feel a boundary. Ra said then show him one. Horus assembled the followers at Edfu. The full force. Every iron harpoon, every trained soldier, every god who held a bordered domain. This time he did use drums. He marched south, toward Set's storm center. Not the eastern border, the source. The place in the deep desert where Set drew the storms from. Horus was going to the origin. Set saw them coming. He had expected the border. He hadn't expected the source. That was the move Horus had been working toward. Not to defend the boundary, but to enter the storm. They met in the heart of the desert, between the third and fourth cataract, where the Nile runs through red rock and the sky is half storm and half clear, the landscape of the in-between. Set said you came to the desert. Horus said the temples were yours to leave alone. Set said the temples tell a story I don't agree with. Horus said, then tell your own. Set was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said I've been trying to. Horus said I know. Set said you could have let me. Horus said, not at the cost of the record. The storm winds slowed. Not stopped. Set's storms never fully stop. But the deliberate targeting ended. A degree of attention withdrawn. The temples would stand. Horus didn't take Set prisoner. He didn't drive him back to the eastern border. He did something the texts describe as unusual. He sat down in the desert and waited. Set sat too, eventually. They sat in the desert between the cataract and the storm for what the texts describe as 3 days. The followers waited at a distance. The armies on both sides waited. No one recorded what was said across those 3 days. Thoth was not present. His palate was miles away. Whatever passed between Horus and Set in that desert, it was between them. What the texts do say on the 4th day, they rose together. They walked back to Egypt separately. Set to the desert border, Horus to the Nile. And the storms that had targeted the temples never came again. Horus didn't tell Isis what was said. She asked once. He said it was between Set and me. She accepted that. But the look on her face said she filed it away for later. The kingdom stabilized. The Hermopolis theology faded. Not because it was suppressed, but because the argument against it had been won in public. The lead priest wrote a recantation. Thoth filed it. The temples were repaired. The eroded reliefs recarved, in some places improved. The priests, who did the recarving, had studied the originals and understood them better for having seen them threatened. Horus visited the restored temple at Karnak. He stood in front of the recarved reliefs for a long time. The priests didn't interrupt him. They knew that look. He touched the carved face. Just once, the priests pretended not to see it. That is one of the kindest things priests do. Look away at the right moment. Maybe you know that feeling. The moment you touch something that holds someone who isn't there anymore. The way it's both too much and exactly right. The years that followed were the richest of Horus's reign. Not dramatic, rich. The Nile flooded well. The temples were rebuilt, then extended. New priests were trained, new stories were told. Here is a thing the myth does not make obvious. The Horus story is also a story about how a son becomes his father. And how that is never simple. Osiris was good, generous, open. He believed the world could be better, and he acted on that belief until it killed him. Horus was different, more cautious, More strategic, less trusting. This is what grief does. It doesn't just wound you. It teaches you. Horus never forgot the coffin at the feast. The beautiful trap that no one saw coming. He never stopped looking for the trap. And yet he had also learned something Osiris never needed to learn: how to let chaos have its place. Osiris wanted to replace Set's domain with order. Horus learned to include it. Egypt survived 3,000 years. Not because it had no chaos, because it had a mythology that held chaos in right relationship to order. Horus and Set together made that possible. A generation passed, then another. Horus watched Egypt change, new temples, new cities, new families along the Nile. The myth beneath it all unchanged. He found that both reassuring and strange. He sent word to the dot regularly. Not always through priests. Sometimes just the daily ritual, the Maat offering. The pause before he lifted the small figure. The line between the living and the dead kept open. There was a year when the Nile failed. Not Set's fault, just the Nile. The flood came too low, the harvest thin. Horus opened the reserve granaries without hesitation. He spent 3 months in the delta that year, managing the distribution himself. Sleeping in the field tents with the officials. Eating what the farmers ate. That detail survives in the records because Thoth thought it mattered. That year ended. The next Nile came higher. The harvests recovered. The Egyptians offered thanks at every temple in the country. At Edfu, they carved the recovery into the wall beside the battles. Of course he did. This time with something Horus hadn't anticipated: a son. A divine child, born in the desert storms, carrying Set's energy in a new form. The child's name was not given in the texts. He appears only as the son of Set, the next incarnation of the challenge. Horus received the news without surprise. He had known the contest would continue. Isis, when she heard, laughed, not unkindly, the laugh of someone who has seen enough cycles to find the pattern funny. She said, "So he gets to watch his son fight yours." Horus had an heir by then, Harpocrates, the child, Horus, the new Falcon. Small, learning to walk, already watching the sky with his father's eyes. The son of Set and Harpocrates met, for the first time at the edge of the delta. The children of the contest, carrying it forward. The texts describe it as a meeting, not a battle. Not yet. That meeting, the children at the delta edge, was the last thing Horus and Set watched together. After that, the contest belonged to the next generation. The parents could only watch. Horus received a message from Osiris, not through ritual, through a dream. Osiris spoke in the specific way of the dead in Egyptian belief: brief, clear, without the uncertainty of the living. Osiris said, "It's nearly time for you to come to me. Not as visitor, as resident. You know what that means." Horus said in the dream, "I know." He didn't tell Isis immediately. He sat with it for 3 days. Then he told her. She already knew. She had seen it in the way he looked at Harpocrates. Mothers know the shape of departure. Horus spent the months before his transition doing the things that needed to be done. Not monuments to himself, preparation for Harpocrates. Instructions, introductions, the practical work of handing something off. He introduced Harpocrates to Thoth formally. Thoth said nothing, just looked at the boy for a long moment, then wrote something on his palette. He didn't show it to anyone. He took Harpocrates to the temple at Edfu, showed him the reliefs, every battle, the tribunal, the harpoon in Set's skull. The full record, he said. This is what the wall knows. You need to know it too. Harpocrates asked about Set. Horus said he is your opponent. He is also your opposite, which means he is the part of the world you cannot rule alone. Harpocrates didn't understand yet. He would. On the last morning, Horus performed the Maat ritual. He paused. The same pause, the same length it had always been. Then he handed the small Maat figure to Harpocrates. Harpocrates held it carefully. The way children hold things they sense are important without knowing why. Horus watched him for a moment. Then good. Now every morning, just like that. Isis dressed him for the last time. The same gesture as the coronation. her hands at the clasps, the adjustment of the double crown. Everything the same. Just the direction different. He said goodbye to Ra on the bark. At dawn again above the Nile, Ra said you did it correctly. Horus said I had good examples. Ra said, you made better ones. He said goodbye to Hathor at her temple in Dendera. She held his face in her hands. The goddess who had healed his eye. The tenderness of the gesture unchanged from that day in the reeds. He said goodbye to Set at the desert border. They stood on opposite sides of the line. The black land and the red land. Set said I'll miss the contest. Horus said Harpocrates will give you a new one. Set almost smiled. He said goodbye to Thoth last. Thoth was at his pallet. He looked up when Horus arrived. He put the pen down, which he never did mid-record. He stood. Thoth said I've been recording this since before you were born. Horus said I know. Thoth said it's a good record. Horus said, make sure Harpocrates reads it. Thoth said I'll make sure. The transition of Horus from living king to Osiris of the dead followed the same ritual his father had undergone. Isis performed it. She was very precise. She had done this before. Horus descended to the dot, the same dark river, the same stars beneath the world, different now, not as visitor, but as resident. As Osiris. There are texts that say Osiris stepped back from his throne when Horus arrived. That he waited. That he let Horus take the seat. The ruler of the dead, as Osiris had been. In the living world, Harpocrates sat on the throne of Egypt. Small hands holding the crook and flail. The double crown a little large. Isis standing at the edge of the hall watching. Thoth was already writing. The new record beginning the morning after the transition. A fresh roll of papyrus. The first line Harpocrates, son of Horus, son of Osiris, began his reign. In the dot, Horus as Osiris performed the first judgment of the dead under his stewardship. He held the feather. He held the heart. He weighed them with the same attention. He had given everything. The first soul to be judged, the texts say, was a farmer from the Delta. A man who had grown grain during the hard year when the Nile ran low. Who had shared what he had with his neighbor. Horus let him pass. He watched the farmer move into the deeper Duat, toward the fields of Aru, the Egyptian afterlife. The good place. The farmer didn't look back. Osiris was watching from somewhere deeper in the dot. He saw the judgment. He said nothing. He had taught his son, through everything, across the whole long myth, what the scales were for. The son knew. Above the world, Harpocrates was learning the morning ritual. In the dot below, Horus was learning the evening one. The myth continued in both directions at once. The Egyptians painted this continuity on their coffin lids. Above the living world, the Nile, the sky. Below the Duat, the stars, the scales. Both real, both necessary, neither complete without the other. This is what the eye of Horus meant on the coffin. Not protection from the dark, presence in it. The eye that was lost and came back. Watching through the darkness toward what comes after. The eye still turns up, in modern jewelry, in tattoos, in logos and signs in the corners of buildings. 3,000 years of protection, still circulating. Still being placed on things people want watched over. That's the part that stays with you. The eye that was torn out and came back. Still watching. 3,000 years later. Still on the walls where people want protection. Still meaning I survived this. You can too. Harpocrates grew. He learned the rituals. He studied Thoth's record. He met the son of Set at the Delta Edge. Not as children meeting, but as successors meeting. Different quality. In the Duat, Horus performed the judgments every night. He did not tire of it. Each soul was different. Each heart a different weight. He paid attention to every one. Sometimes the heart was heavier than the feather. Those judgments were hardest. Horus did not take pleasure in them. He gave them the same attention as the easy ones, maybe more. Osiris watched him for years from the deeper dot. Then one day, divine time being unmeasurable, Osiris stopped watching. He had seen what he needed to see. He rested. Horus noticed. The moment Osiris rested, he felt it, a change in the quality of the dot. The way you feel the shift when someone who was watching quietly stops watching. He paused in a judgment. He kept going. The soul before the scales was waiting. Horus returned his attention to the feather, to the heart, to the work. That's the part that matters. He kept going. Above the world, Harpocrates made a mistake in his first year. A canal decision that flooded the wrong fields. He came to Isis. She said, "Fix it." He said, "How?" She said, "You already know." He fixed it. He walked the flooded fields himself. He ordered the redistribution. He slept in the field tent with the officials. Thoth Rhoda like father, like son. The son of Set and Harpocrates began their own contest. The next iteration of the oldest story. Their first real dispute was over water rights to a southern tributary. Nothing divine. Practical. Thoth mediated. Of course Thoth mediated. He had been mediating since before Harpocrates was born. The ibis god showing up with his palette at every junction, recording, clarifying. The water rights were resolved in 3 days. Thoth filed the agreement. Harpocrates offered Malat the next morning. The son of Set went back to the desert. The story continued. But in the dot, something was different. A darkness, not Set's darkness, older, had begun to press against the borders of the underworld. Apep, the chaos serpent, eternal enemy of Ra, testing the walls of the dead. Apep doesn't appear in most tellings of the Horus myth. This is because Apep is not a character. It's a condition. The formless threat, the darkness that needs no motivation, the chaos that predates even Set. Horus sent word to Set, through the boundary, through Thoth. Not a request. A statement. Apep is pressing the dot walls. The borders between order and chaos are holding for now. They will need both of us. Set's response came fast. It said, "I'm already at the borders. I've been holding them since before you arrived. This is what I'm for." Horus, reading it in the dot, understood something he hadn't before. The duat held. The walls held. Set fought Apep at the border the same way he fought it on Ra's bark each night. Not to win, to hold. And holding was enough. The darkness did not come in. The story continued. The story of Horus is not really about a throne. It never was. The throne was just the shape the question took. The real question was, what do you do with what was taken before you arrived? Everyone carries something they didn't choose. A loss that happened before they were old enough to prevent it. A story someone else started that they're now in the middle of. Horus didn't transcend that. He carried it. He carried his father's unfinished story for his entire living reign. In the pause before the Maat offering. In the touch on the carved face at Karnak. That's what the myth offers. Not resolution, continuation. The story doesn't end when the throne is won. It changes what it's about. Isis is the one who made it possible. Not Horus alone. The myth is hers as much as his. The mother who worked in the shadows. Who was banned from the tribunal and crossed the water anyway. Who built the argument that won. And Set, who is not the villain exactly. Or who is, but who is also necessary. The myth understands something that most stories don't. The thing you're fighting can also be the thing that holds the border. The Egyptians lived with this complexity for 3,000 years. They didn't need Set to be defeated. They needed him to be placed. There's a difference. Horus understood it, eventually. Thoth is the one who kept the record. The god of wisdom who was never the main character, and was always the most important one. The one who showed up at every critical moment, not to act, to witness, to write it down. There is always someone like Thoth. The one who doesn't fight and doesn't rule, but who is there. Who pays attention, who records, who makes sure the story survives. You may know someone like that. The Eye of Horus survived because the story it belongs to is true in the way that matters. Not factually true, but emotionally true. It describes a real experience, losing something essential and finding your way back to it. Losing something essential and finding your way back. That's the whole story. Osiris lost his life. Isis lost her husband. Horus lost his father and his eye. Egypt lost its good king. All of them found their way back to something. not the same as before. The eye Horus got back was not identical to the one he lost. It carried the scar. The Egypt Horus ruled was not Osiris's Egypt. It carried 80 years of Set. Different, still real. The ancient Egyptians placed the eye of Horus everywhere they wanted protection. On tombs, on ships, on doorways, on children's amulets. Not to prevent harm. To say, I survived what came before. I can survive what comes next. That's why the symbol has lasted. It doesn't promise safety. It promises something more honest. The eye that was taken can be restored. The seeing that was interrupted can return. The wound is not the end. Horus spent his life carrying his father forward. Not as a burden, as a purpose. The difference between those two things is everything. Osiris needed to be carried. Horus chose to carry him. That's what the myth offers anyone who is carrying something. The question isn't whether the weight is real. It is. The question is whether you can find the thing inside it that's worth carrying forward. The story of Horus ends the same way every Egyptian's story ended, at the scales. A heart on one side, a feather on the other. The question the feather asks is very simple: did you keep faith? Not did you win. Not did you rule well. Did you keep faith? With the people, with the work, with the truth the feather represents. That's what Ma'at asks. That's what Horus kept asking himself. Horus kept faith. With Osiris's memory, with Isis's sacrifice, with the people who grew grain along the Nile, with the truth Thoth spent his life recording. He kept faith. That was the whole story. The Nile still flows. The fields that Osiris taught the Egyptians to farm are still there. Changed, modern, still fed by the same river. Somewhere in the desert, a red storm moves along the edge. The balance holds. Every pharaoh who ever sat on Egypt's throne was Horus. That wasn't metaphor. It was the operating premise of an entire civilization. The living king as the living god. The pharaoh's titles made it explicit. Horus name, Golden Horus name, son of Ra, Lord of the Two Lands. Every title a different face of the same claim. This person continues the story. The coronation ritual was Horus's coronation. Every time. The same crowns. The same gods invoked. The same promises made. 3,000 years of the same ceremony. Because the myth underneath it was still true. When a pharaoh died, the announcement was the Horus has flown to heaven. The new king was announced, the Horus has arisen. The myth was the grammar of succession itself. The Temple of Edfu. Still standing in southern Egypt, still one of the best preserved temples in the world. Was built during the reign of Ptolemy III. 2,000 years after the myth's oldest telling. The story was still being told in stone. Tourists visit it today. They walk the same corridors the pharaohs walked. They look at the same carved face of Horus that Egyptian priests tended each morning with oil and song. The story is still there. The eye of Horus appears in places the ancient Egyptians never imagined. On the backs of American dollar bills. Debated, symbolic, contested. In logos of medical companies. In the jewelry of people who have never read a word of Egyptian myth. The myth of Horus shaped every story about a rightful heir reclaiming what was stolen. The orphaned prince. The son who avenges the father. The heir who must prove themselves before an indifferent court. Hamlet, the Lion King, all of it. The story survived because it's true. Not historically true, emotionally true. Every generation finds Horus somewhere in themselves. The one carrying what someone else left unfinished. The one who keeps going anyway. The falcon still appears over the Nile. Real falcons. The descendants of the birds the Egyptians called sacred. They circle the same thermals above the same river. The sky Horus was said to rule still carries his birds. The story is done now. Or this telling of it is. The myth itself doesn't end. It continues wherever someone carries it forward. The Nile is still there. The same current, the same banks. The same water that carried the golden coffin, and the same water that carried the grain boats north to the delta. Still moving. Somewhere above the desert, a storm moves along the horizon, Set's domain. The chaos that was never destroyed, only directed. It keeps the border honest. And in the dot below the world, the scales are balanced. A heart, a feather. The same question the same scales have been asking for 4,000 years. Horus keeping watch. If tonight felt like something, subscribe. We'll be here next week. Another story, another night like this. We'll be here when you're ready. Let the story settle now. The falcon on the throne, the mother at the threshold, the scribe still writing, the river moving south to north the way it always has. The stars over the delta are the same stars, the same ones the priests charted, the same ones Isis navigated by when she searched for Osiris. Still there. The eye of Horus is on the coffin lid. Watching. Not frightening, watching. The eye that came back from the dark. Keeping you company through the night. Sleep now, the scales are balanced. The Nile is running. The falcon is in the sky. You don't have to carry anything tonight. It can wait until morning. The river keeps moving. The stars keep their places. The eye keeps watch. Rest now.